life.
Okay, thank you. So we are ready to start the Cannabis Advisory Commission Subcommittee on Public Health meeting. Today is September 29th, 2021. The whole gang is here. And so what we're going to do today is first we're going to take public comment. And then each of the commissioners has taken the lead on a section of possible regulatory recommendations that we want to make to the Cannabis Advisory Commission as a whole and ultimately to the CCB. And so we're going to be discussing those. And I imagine we're probably going to want a break somewhere in the middle because this is a pretty long meeting, 3 hours. Of course, we don't have to take the whole time, but you know, we have it if we need it. So, you know, I'm anticipating taking a break probably between the health notices and disclosure recommendations section and the ready to consume products recommendations, depending on how quickly we move. So with that being said, let's go ahead and open up for public comment. Is there any public comment?
Madam Chair, this is Ashish Bala from the AG's office. I don't know if we just wanted to take a step back and do a quick roll call just to see who's on the line.
Sure, that's always a good idea, yes. So we can introduce the members of the subcommittee. So I am Dr. Jennifer Pearson. Commissioner Chu?
Present.
And Commissioner Nelson?
Present.
Yes. Commissioner DePreet?
Present.
And Commissioner Hayes? Hello, yes. And then we have quite a number of attendees on the panel, and I'm sure people who have called in as well. I don't know that we're supposed to do a roll call for them though, right?
That's correct, Madam Chair. No roll call for the public is necessary.
Great, thank you. Okay, all right, so now let's move forward to public comment. And I believe if you're on the phone, you can unmute yourself by pushing *6. So if I'm wrong about that, please do correct me.
I believe it's *9.
*9.
If you're connecting via Zoom, just push the raise hand button and then we'll make you available to speak.
Right. So *9 if you're on the phone. And if you're on Zoom, just go ahead and raise your hand. Okay. I'm going to take that to mean there's no public comment at the moment, but you'll have opportunity for public comment again at the end of the meeting. And since we're going to be talking about more specifics today, I bet people will have things to say, and I encourage you to do so. Okay, so we're going to talk about air quality regulation recommendations, health notices and disclosure recommendations, ready to consume product recommendations, occupational health and training recommendations, and finally, inspections recommendations. So the first thing on that list is air quality regulation recommendations. And that was the area that I took on. So I'm going to drive, as we say, in Zoom. So just share my screen. Okay, so you should see my PowerPoint at the moment. Is that correct? I see nods. Wonderful. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Great. So first, I'm just going to go through these so that you get a general kind of overview. And can you see the presenter view or the full screen view? Full screen?
Full screen.
Great. So first, I'm just going to go through these, and then we'll go back and discuss them in detail. But I first want to give you an overview so you get an idea of the lay of the land. So, obviously, I come from a background in tobacco control, and therefore I have a special kind of focus on air quality because I'm very familiar with the consequences of exposure to particulate matter, particularly. One moment, I see that we have a Q&A question. Will the PowerPoint slides be available later? I'm happy to send those to the CCB so that it can be posted online, yes. So how I came to these recommendations was a review of the scientific literature on the consequences of exposure to secondhand marijuana smoke, and also review of existing regulations, both at the state and jurisdiction levels. So I kind of took a Frankenstein approach. I took the best regulations I could find from all over the country. So many jurisdictions require a separate smoking room if they do indeed allow smoking at consumption lounges, which not all of them do. And I'm going to be, just to simplify and say smoking, though really when I say smoking, I mean smoking, vaping, and or dabbing. However, I recognize that dabbing and vaping do not produce the same amount of secondhand smoke or air pollution as smoking, nowhere near as much, and likely they are significantly less harmful for the primary user and for the person who's exposed to the aerosols and emissions from those ways. But just for simplification, this is how I'm gonna go about things. So 13 jurisdictions in 3 states require a separate smoking room. I do think we need to recognize that all the rest of the recommendations that we're going to be discussing, it's not going to eliminate the risks of exposure to secondhand smoke, whether it's marijuana smoke or wildfire smoke or tobacco smoke. But what we're trying to do is mitigate as much as possible, given the constraints we have from the legislation. So in order to have a smoking room, several jurisdictions have some mandates as to how that room should be constructed. So one of the things that I believe the top one is from Alaska. Businesses with an on-site consumption endorsement, an on-site consumption lounge must be freestanding. The reasoning behind that is that it's next to impossible to keep smoke from a smoking room from leaking into a non-smoking adjacent business that, for example, shares, ceilings or, like a roof structure. It's just pretty much impossible to have that next door business not have some sort of consequence of what they're next to. A designated smoking room must also meet the following standards. This is kind of taken from several different places from, I believe, San Francisco, Alaska, I want to say Denver. So they say we must have a separate heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and HVAC system so that the smoking room air is not recirculated to other parts of the premises. They also say that the smoking room air must be directly exhausted to the outdoors, and it must be filtered so that it's not a kind of a nuisance to neighbors, but also it shouldn't be exhausted in a place where it can therefore re-enter the building through windows, doors, etc. And then they also say that the filtration system on that exhaust must be sufficient to remove visible smoke and adequate to eliminate odor at the property line. I'm personally less concerned about this because once it gets outdoors, it's a nuisance, but it's going to be dissipated most likely. But still, this is a pretty common requirement across multiple jurisdictions. So, and I've included it. The room itself has several different jurisdictions have clear standards. So for example, it has to be completely separated from the non-smoking portions of the premises by solid partitions or glass without openings other than doors. So just kind of putting people off to the side behind a partial wall, for example, is not adequate. And then all doors leading to the smoking room have to be self-closing and have to have a seal so that, when the door is closed, there's not smoke leaking out around the cracks around the door. And so that's for the, the smoking room specifically. And then my second recommendation is to mandate indoor air quality standards and protocols that minimize employees' exposure to secondhand smoke, SHS is secondhand smoke, and ensure safe and healthy workplace environment for employees. So, we heard from the experts from UC San Francisco talk about two different types of exposure that could have either immediate or long-term health consequences. There's the long-term exposure to, even moderate kind of particulate matter. And then there's also the kind of immediate risks of being exposed to moderate to high levels of particulate matter. So I haven't quite figured out what the standard should be for air quality, excluding the smoking room in the non-smoking areas of the consumption lounge. This is still something I'm thinking about. I would welcome comment from the public. Certainly we should talk about this among the commissioners. But what I'm thinking about is, we need to have some sort of average during operating hours where the parts per million PM 2.5 does not exceed that average during operating hours. And then also we want to make sure that there's not spikes. For example, if the smoking room is not appropriately pressurized, whenever someone opens the door, you get a big spike, then, how effective is that smoking room from keeping secondhand smoke in the smoking room? And then also in the spirit of reducing risk for employees, this first bullet, I believe, is from San Francisco, and it states, employers may not require employees to enter the smoking room as a condition of employment. So let's say you have asthma, you shouldn't have to go into the smoking room, especially if you're having a particularly sensitive day. And then consumption lounges must design smoking rooms and work protocols such that the need for employees to enter the smoking room is minimized. The employees can monitor activities in the smoking room from a smoke-free room, and employees can fulfill kind of your regular anticipated patron requests without entering the smoking room itself. So for example, they can serve more products, they can answer questions, they can take payment without actually having to be exposed to secondhand smoke. This also recognizes that they are going to have to go in there occasionally, but let's minimize their exposure as much as possible. And then my third recommendation is kind of similar to two, but this one focuses on what's going on in the smoking room. So my current understanding is that in the smoking room, the kind of main public health concern is we want to make sure that the PM 2.5 in there is not so concentrated that you're going to enter that room and you're going to increase risk of some sort of cardiopulmonary event. So I am again still trying to think through how to fill in these X's here. So does not exceed a certain X PM 2.5 on average, does not exceed some peak PM 2.5. Our experts from UC San Francisco suggested things like including exhaust hoods over seating areas or limiting capacity. I think those are things that we could consider, but I don't know that we have to mandate those things. If we just say, here's the standard that you have to conform to, get there however you want to get there. And then recommendation number 4 for outdoor smoking areas, which from a public health point of view, this is much preferable to an indoor smoking area. So I'd also say this is probably the least developed of my kind of recommendations so far. But I have seen from other jurisdictions kind of a similar concern about odor and visible smoke from the property line. And this is, again, more of a kind of a nuisance concern for neighbors. And then also many jurisdictions say you can't have that smoking area visible from the property line, which I think is reasonable, just if nothing else, just for, kind of social norm reasons. And then I think it would be important to, just like in recommendation number 2, where we're saying you need to create protocols and structures to allow employees to spend as much time as possible outside of the smoking area. I think the same thing should be employed for the outdoor smoking area. And then I also have this kind of lingering question that I'm not sure how to deal with. I have heard people talk about, especially in the media, the desire to have things like concert spaces where people could consume cannabis. And so I assume that concert, that, it would be a lounge that also has concert space, right? Which would therefore bring in both people who are there to listen to music and use marijuana, but also people who are just there to listen to music and perhaps don't want to be exposed to secondhand smoke. So how to deal with that, I am not sure. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. So that's it. Those are my recommendations. So I'm going to come out of presenter mode and go into just kind of regular mode so that I can take notes and make changes. So Commissioner Chu.
Yes, I'm just for your peak and your exposure, I guess you're trying to come up with these concentrations. I'm just wondering if it may make sense to go back to what OSHA would use for chemical exposure.
Yep.
So you have an 8-hour exposure limit, and then you have a 15-minute. The short-term exposure limit is usually 15 minutes of exposure, as opposed to a peak, because I think you can hit some weird things in there, at any real time sort of thing. But and I don't know what will be considered a safe level, but I'm thinking that might be a closer standard to go with, because then you could actually apply monitors to employees from time to time and go and do this and make sure things are working.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I'm imagining, there's a period, a randomly selected 1 or 2 week period where it's like, okay, here's your time where you put, monitors on your employees and we see how it goes. Yeah, I like that idea. Commissioner Dupree.
So I like what you have here. I would recommend maybe, I was thinking about for the nuisance odor for outdoor stuff. As far as like air pollution goes, if we borrow kind of from that domain, a lot of factories and manufacturers have to use a smokestack so that the exhaust isn't released until it's so far up above where people are walking around. And that, I don't know what the recommended height might be, but I think people would appreciate an eyesore more than, having to smell marijuana odor all day long. Because I think that I could anticipate neighbors being grumpy about the locations of these if we don't find a way to get rid of that odor.
Absolutely.
So recommending a smokestack or like a certain height requirement before it's released into the air might be helpful.
That's a great idea. Okay, great. Commissioner Chu, is your hand still up? Is that a new idea?
Sorry, no, forgot to lower it.
Okay. Commissioner Nelson, yes.
Hey, so just kind of continuing on to what Commissioner Dupree was suggesting with odor control requirements. One of the things that existing cannabis companies have to do in Nevada right now, specifically cultivators and producers, because we deal with some stinky things sometimes. We've had to come up with odor control programs and submit those to the CCB in order to, we get complaints sometimes, and so we've had to use carbon filters or different things to help mitigate odor. So perhaps in the application for a consumption lounge, an odor control program could be required for applicants for consumption lounges.
Great, wonderful. Are there any thoughts about specifically this slide concerning ways to minimize employee exposure? Yeah, Commissioner Nelson.
So I guess I have a question about your point for employers may not require employees to enter a smoke room as a condition of employment. With regard to that, so does that mean like if someone was hired as like a smoke room attendant that they could essentially refuse to go into the smoke room, correct?
Well, I think that would be, yeah, I think technically that is true. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So is there any, like, I know we've talked about respirators or masks or other sort of like PPE. Is that something that could be entertained for employee protections as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we could also recommend that, like, we could modify this if I can be certain that the PPE is adequate to reduce risk, right? Then, which it should be, like a well-fitted respirator should do it. It certainly can keep viruses out. Why can't it keep ppm 2.5? PM 2.5. I mean, so we could say something like we could like modify so that like they can't like have to provide PPE.
Yeah, I think that's probably good. That, or also too, like applicants for consumption lounges would have to provide a employee protection program that would have to be reviewed and approved by the CCB.
Yep. Let's see. Have to. Yep. Okay. I like it. I'm not sure who raised their hand first. Yeah. Let's say Commissioner Hayes.
So some of these, PPE is hard to get these days. It's expensive. If they didn't want to do those kinds of things, they could just make sure every service was provided outside. So they come out, not employees go in, but they come out to get whatever they need and then they go back in. So that has to be a two-way door.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's I think that's probably the spirit of this statement from San Francisco is like, you can do your job without having to go into the smoking room. I don't know. I do think PPE is not as difficult to find as it used to be. I can order respirators on Amazon, no problem. If I can do it. dispensaries can do it, or cannabis lounges can do it. Commissioner Dupree?
I was just thinking we might be able to avoid having to say that first bullet point if we stick with Commissioner Chu's idea to make the requirement a 15-minute exposure level, right? So if we make it more vague and we say cannabis or consumption lounges, it's up to you to make sure that your workflow prevents 15-minute exposure levels above a certain amount. And then they can decide what, whether that means a respirator before entering the smoking rooms, or if that means, you pop in, you pop out, you do a quick sanitization before the next group, or, it gives a little bit more flexibility, and I think you'll get less pushback.
Yeah, let's see here. I'm sorry, can you say that again? Because I want to make sure that
So if we reword it to just say that the consumption lounges are responsible for ensuring that a worker's 15-minute exposure level does not exceed X.
Yeah, the only thing I'm concerned about here is some data that I'm looking at that suggests that very brief exposures to fine particulate matter can kind of push someone who's on the brink over the edge, So I'm gonna do more research into this.
I think it is important that we have staff that go in there for cleaning and emergencies, though, right? Because later we're going to talk about preventing sexual assault or whatever. Like we need to. I'm glad that you added the be able to monitor from the outside for sure. But if an intervention needs to happen, we need staff to be able to go in.
Yeah,
but I agree that it's riskier.
I agree with you. I think I'm imagining a situation where a person is like, my asthma is acting up today. I don't have the option of calling in sick. But here I am, working on site, and, my boss wants me to go in and change the ashtrays, I'm concerned that's going to push me over the edge into an asthma attack. There's in what situation do we require workers to do things that are risky? I guess that's the question. We'll just have to think about this more, because I hear what you guys are saying too. We don't want to have a staff full of people working on a consumption lounge who are like, nope, I'm not going in that room, right? That's not going to work either.
Yeah, every time we have a vomit incident.
Say that again, Commissioner Hayes.
Every time we have a vomit incident, we have an area that people don't want to go in, and you have to. The bathrooms, people don't want to clean them, and vomit incidents. So those are the two things. And we just have to provide the equipment for you to do it safely.
Yes, right. Yes, right. Provide the equipment to do it safely. That's a good way to put it. Where would I put that? There we go. Commissioner Chu.
Hi, yes. So if you look at this from an OSHA perspective, they usually say there are 3 ways you control employee exposure. So the very first one are your engineering controls. That's your ventilation. The second one is scheduling. So you have your 8-hour commercial exposure limit, you have your 15-minute exposure limits, and you schedule, okay, you have certain breaks, or you switch their job off, so you're doing something else, where you're lessening that exposure over time. The very last one that they allow in there is if you can't do it by the other 2 methods, is your personal protective equipment.
Yeah.
And that's because it is so hard to deal with. It is, when you're talking about respirators, now you're talking about respirator programs that need to be approved by OSHA. The employees who have respirators need to get your medical examination for that regularly to check their lung capacity, things like that. It's proper training of cleaning the respirators. It is changing the cartridges.
Mm.
You know, I can't believe the number of times I've seen people who just pull cartridges out of a drawer that have been there for months.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this should have been disposed of, 2 months ago. You can't be using this anymore. And you can't tell on these cartridges, like really, unless you write the date that they were actually used, you can't tell, are they still good anymore? So it's a lot more complicated with the PPE requirement on here. And so that's just kind of, and as I said, I don't know what a safe exposure limit is for this, but it's going to add a lot more into here if we're going to rely on this. And in certain cases, yes, in an emergency, you're going to have to have them available, for people to go in there to look out, but that will slow it down as well. It's going to take a couple minutes to put this on, and if somebody is having a health crisis in there, that's going to slow that down on there. The only other thing I wanted to talk a little bit was, I think earlier there was one about pushing the outside air up, over certain heights. I have worked in the chemical industry before, and that works for most times until you get an inversion layer over the city. And then sometimes it just dumps it back down. And I've worked with other ones where, chemical plants do have that in there. So I think it's probably better if you can control it from even leaving the facility to begin with through, just the filtering of the air. It's probably a little more consistent. Down here in Vegas, we probably don't get very many inversion layers, but I don't know what it is up in the Reno area with that sort of weather patterns up there.
Definitely inversion layers. Most definitely. Not today. All right. I want to be sensitive of time. So does anyone else have anything you want to comment on? Thank you. These are really helpful. Okay. All right. Well, then let's move on to Commissioner Nelson. You are going to take us through the health notices and disclosure recommendations.
Yes. Okay. So bear with me as I share my screen with you guys.
Yes.
Okay. Do you guys see, which screen do you see?
We see no screen.
No screen?
Yeah.
Oh goodness. Okay. Well,
I can walk you through if you'd like.
That would be a little assistance. I'm so sorry. Okay.
Perfectly fine. So if you go down to the bottom of your Zoom webinar screen, you should see the share screen button.
Yes.
Click on that.
Okay.
And that should bring up a pop-up window that gives you probably several different options. And there you go.
Is that okay? Is it shared now? I'm so sorry.
Yes, it is. Yep, got it.
Okay, perfect. So let me see. Is that showing you the screen with my the full screen of the PowerPoint slide, or is that showing the secondary slides as well?
It's showing neither one. It's showing a drop down, like a zoomed in drop down menu. That's very strange.
Weird. I am so sorry.
Now you're back. Now you're back to just the regular PowerPoint view.
Okay. All right. So is this now visible? I am so sorry.
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So to kind of dive right in, these were the topics for what we had previously discussed about our health notices and disclosures. We all kind of are aware of those. So I'm just going to dive right into what the existing laws are at dispensaries in Nevada of the disclosures that they need to provide to patrons who are purchasing at the dispensary level. So I'm going to go through all of these in a little bit more detail, but just so you understand, this is what every dispensary needs to provide to a consumer who's purchasing medical or recreational cannabis. And what I'd like to recommend is that we keep things consistent in the industry. So I think what is required for at dispensaries to give to patrons should also be required for consumption lounges to make people aware or warn people of the effects of cannabis or possible like, health issues that they may have. And maintaining the industry maintaining consistency in the industry has a few benefits, but the biggest one is that we're giving everybody the same sort of disclosures, and public education is overall the same. Having different disclosures at dispensaries versus different disclosures at consumption lounges, I think would be a disservice to the industry. So to kind of go from that though, I think that these disclosures and warnings do need some improvement. So to move into the next one, the statement for pregnant or breastfeeding women. The current statement is pregnant women should consult with a physician before ingesting cannabis or cannabis products. And this statement's pretty open-ended and doesn't really address the issues of consuming cannabis while pregnant or breastfeeding. It doesn't really communicate that there's any health risks associated with it. Another thing too is there's another part of the law that I put at the bottom there that says a cannabis sales facilities should not recommend products to women that are pregnant or breastfeeding. So I thought that was a little interesting because it seems to be a bit contradictory, but nonetheless, what do we actually recommend? Right now, the CDC, the FDA, the US Surgeon General, the general consensus is that pregnant or breastfeeding women should not consume cannabis. There are health effects to developing fetuses. THC can pass through breast milk and affect a baby that is breastfeeding. THC consumption or cannabis consumption during pregnancy is affiliated with low birth weight. And it also is traced to possibly affecting the development of the endocannabinoid system of a developing fetus. So recently, Colorado actually required that dispensaries put postings up warning women or pregnant people from consuming THC, and they pretty much said like consuming THC could be harmful to a baby. That being said, the recommendation that I think we should make to the CCB would be to just suggest that pregnant people should not consume cannabis at all, and saying that using cannabis during pregnancy could harm, or during pregnancy or breastfeeding could harm a baby's development. Also with this, one thing I think we should do is require this be posted in restrooms, similar to what the birth defect affiliation with alcohol warnings are currently posted in women's restrooms in Nevada. And I think we should kind of continue on with that for cannabis as well, as that has, in my opinion, turned out to be a really great public health campaign of warning people of the effects for alcohol use during pregnancy. This could also be the same sort of tactic we use to address cannabis use during pregnancy as well. An idea of what this might look like is just this little sign I put together. But obviously, if this language, if you guys see room for improvement with this language, I would love to hear it. I think this is just a baseline of what we could do, but there's a lot of possibilities of better ways that we could warn people about the effects of consuming cannabis while pregnant or breastfeeding. The next thing is for people with respiratory or cardiovascular conditions. So the current regulations just say that there may be health risks associated with consuming cannabis, and it doesn't really address the issues that we see with respiratory or cardiovascular conditions and cannabis use. And I was doing a lot of research on this, and it's a bit open-ended. So when we're talking about somebody with a respiratory condition, are we talking about somebody with bronchitis, or are we talking about somebody with emphysema? Both of those people have very different conditions that are equally valid and should be made aware that, hey, there's possible risks of you consuming cannabis with your current condition. But based upon what those people are dealing with, they could kind of have different reactions, or they could possibly be okay for edibles and not for smoking, and who knows. The other thing too is with addressing only respiratory and cardiovascular conditions, I think that we're omitting a whole realm of other conditions that people are possibly concerned of, specifically like mental health conditions or other bodily conditions that people should be aware of. So while I don't think we should address these things directly. I think that we should at least give people the opportunity to think twice about consuming cannabis if they have a health concern. And advising people to consult with a physician before consuming cannabis if they're concerned about anything with regard to their body, I think is our safest bet. I understand if they're coming into a dispensary, or I mean, not a dispensary, if they're coming into a consumption lounge, they came with the idea that they want to consume cannabis. And don't get me wrong, I think a lot of people are still going to do it regardless of what we warn them to do or not do. But this may at least cause some people to second guess their decision, and it might help some people who are like on the fence. Moving on with regard to statements of the co-use of marijuana with alcohol or prescription medications, there is a disclosure right now in the existing NCCRs that covers this pretty well. I didn't really see any room for improvement or any reason why we should possibly change this. But if you guys again have recommendations, I'm totally open to hearing that. The next one would be about driving after cannabis use. Again, the NCCRs do address this already with what dispensaries have to provide to consumers. And I think that these two disclosures are pretty sound in what they are requiring, and they could be easily recycled for consumption lounges. The next one is the general health effects of smoking or secondhand smoke. Currently, there is this line on the existing NCCRs for disclosures. The only suggestion that I would have is that instead of saying this product, I think we should possibly change that to say cannabis or cannabis products. They do have a line saying that smoking is hazardous to your health, but that being said, there's nothing in the NCCRs addressing the risks of secondhand smoke, and this is something that we obviously need to warn people of. So in doing some research and looking at what the Nevada Clean Indoor Air Act was and Clean Indoor Air Acts of other states, I came across the requirements for what Arkansas mandates be posted and disclosed to people who are going into smoking areas. And they have these postings required for any place that is a smoking venue. I think that this sign is pretty good. I really liked the language of it. I thought it was very effective. It, told people like, hey, you're going to be exposed to secondhand smoke, and the age limit too is also beneficial because I assume that there will be age limits for consumption lounges as well. So with that, what do we recommend to the CBC or CCB? Sorry. I would say that having a statement similar to what Arkansas requires would be super beneficial, and then also requiring that signage be posted on any external doors or points of entry to a smoking consumption lounge. Obviously, if a consumption lounge is only serving edibles, they wouldn't be, they wouldn't be mandated to do the same sort of thing. But if we have a lounge that does have a smoking room in it, I think that this is a worthwhile disclosure. The next thing is delayed onset. Again, the existing NCCRs have a line in there that warns people about cannabis taking upwards of 2 hours to kick in. I thought, again, this was something that was very effective in communicating the potential risks to consumers. So kind of just maintaining that industry consistency for disclosures is beneficial in this case. Next would be a statement about overconsumption, and there's really not anything in the existing law or the existing cannabis law about overconsumption. So I was doing different research and came up with this based off of the recommendations of the U.S. Surgeon General. So nausea, vomiting, anxiety, agitation, paranoia, and psychosis, these are all risks of excessive cannabis consumption. I did add a line in there, and I think that we possibly should consider advising people who are experiencing symptoms of overconsumption to seek medical attention. I'm recommending this just because there is a uptick in the occurrence of high cannabis consumption users experiencing hyperemesis, which is uncontrolled nausea and vomiting. While it may not necessarily be like an overdose of cannabis per se, any person who is in an impaired state of mind, who is experiencing uncontrollable vomiting, they are at risk of choking and extreme dehydration. So that's kind of where I came up with this idea to recommend people seek medical attention. But again, like if you guys have other recommendations, I'm totally open to hearing that as well. So collectively, this is kind of what I think would be a good baseline to start recommending to the CCB. Kind of just working in the same sort of format of what the existing cannabis regulations are formatted as, and doubling down on some things, adding some new disclosures in there. Obviously, the font minimums for signage that would be posted in the consumption lounges, and just kind of keeping things the same as what we've had before, but improving upon what we've established. Lastly is just getting down to that overconsumption line. That was really the last one I had there. And oh yeah, my resources if anybody wants to see those. But essentially that's all that I had for coming up with recommendations. I'd really love to hear what you guys have to say, or other suggestions of what would make sense. So Commissioner Dupree?
Yeah, I think this is great. Thank you. I did have a few small suggestions.
Yeah.
One is on our side, we really try to make things easy to understand. And when there are ways to make it simpler, to do that. So for example, on one of the warnings, you suggested negatively impact. We could easily just sub that out for harm, right?
Okay, yeah, that's a great idea. I think that was the pregnancy one.
Yeah, I think so too. You know, not everyone's a native English speaker. Not everyone has the same reading level. So the easier, the better, just around the board. I also would suggest the pregnancy signage to not save that information for just the women's restroom. I think that's important knowledge for everyone to have, to be trans inclusive, but also men know women, right? And men talk to women and see women. And if they see a woman who's smoking, it would be great that they had that information to share with them, to maybe try to convince them not to smoke while pregnant. So I would recommend that pregnancy signage be visible to everyone, whether we want to keep it in the bathrooms or just out in the open.
Yeah,
either way. And then I had one more note. Oh, the secondhand smoking warning that you found from another. Yeah, I think that's great, but I think it's missing a statement that secondhand smoke is harmful.
Okay,
right?
Yeah, that's
so it's point. Like warning, secondhand smoke. I love that, but also it could hurt you, you know, some version of that, negative health effects or whatever. And we might want to make it cannabis related too. Some people might just think that tobacco smoke is harmful, but to make it clear that cannabis secondhand smoke can be harmful.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. That's all I have. Thanks.
All right, Commissioner Pearson.
Well, Commissioner Dupree pretty much stole my thunder. So I have to say this is a wonderful job. I'm quite impressed by all the work you put in, and like really well done. I think this is great.
Thank you.
Could you go to the, I think it was recommendation number 2. I don't know.
Was that driving?
The note. Whatever is after pregnancy.
After pregnancy. Okay, I think that was, sorry, so I had this one. Either respiratory or cardiovascular conditions?
Yes. People with, yes. Okay, there may be health risks, there may be physical or mental health risks associated with consumption of cannabis.
Ooh, that's a good one. Oh, wait, so you're saying like adding on, like there may be physical or mental health risks associated with the consumption of cannabis?
Yep, just at the beginning of the, well, just at the beginning of the statement. There may be physical or mental health risks associated with consumption of cannabis or cannabis.
Nice, that's great.
Yeah, and mental, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, good. And then there's the kind of polypharmacy one.
Yes, that's fine.
Let's see, yes. Alcohol or other drugs, including prescription. I would, so in the spirit of bringing down the reading kind of level requirements of these warnings, and I think, are you suggesting that these changes would be made to all health warnings? Like
yes. Sorry to interrupt you. I apologize. Yes. So what I'm saying is, what we disclose at consumption lounges should, in essence, be the same as what is disclosed to consumers buying products at a dispensary. Having two sets of disclosures, in my opinion, I think would cause a lot of confusion. So if we're going to make these recommendations of what a consumption lounge should provide and warn people with, I think that it would be fair to keep that language consistent for what the disclosures are at the dispensary level.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So I would just make some kind of simplification here, like, ingesting cannabis or cannabis products with alcohol or other drugs, including prescription drugs, may result in, I guess unpredictable levels of impairment is.
Yeah, it's a bit wordy.
I'm not exactly sure how to make that easier to understand, but maybe you could work on that.
Okay.
Pretty much, if a word is more than one or two syllables, if there's a way to get rid of that, then that's great. There used to be on Microsoft Word a tool that you could highlight the text, and it will tell you the reading level, the required reading level to understand that text. And I believe the kind of general goal is an 8th grade reading level.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, sorry. There it is.
I just wanted to pop in to say that the CDC has a great resource, a plain language resource. So if you just Google CDC plain language, it has lots of good substitutes and things like that. So that might be worth checking just for our document in general, not necessarily just for this section. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. Oh no.
But I think that competes with the legal standpoint of wanting to be those two probably fight a little bit of being like legally specific and also understandable.
Informative and understandable. Yeah, I mean, let's prioritize people's understanding over legalese, please. I mean,
yes, agree.
We'll see. But thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Commissioner Hayes? Oh, Commissioner Hayes, I think, are you microphone?
Yeah, it is now.
Okay.
I would like to support Commissioner Dupree's statement about the bathrooms. As the state entity where we have that in our SM law, while it says bathrooms are appropriate and that is your target audience, we get hundreds and hundreds of letters a year about how that information needs to be out in the public. And so then we turn around and send out letters, stating this information has to be out in the public. Something I also learned from my adventure into the training world was that instead of words, images are better. And so the FDA and the CDC have all kinds of training materials that are just images. And I think that if some of these words could be transported into an image for medication, an image for pot, an image for mental health, we, transcend that need to read English or to have, a reading level. I was very excited to see some of the labels being transferred to images instead. And so I'll talk about that later. But I think we should try some images as well as language.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you so much.
images also draw the eye more, you know, so if you can't necessarily figure out a way to translate the whole warning into, you know, pictographs, essentially, even just including a picture can draw attention, which is half the battle.
Yeah, for sure. I think that is all really great and like useful feedback. Thank you guys so much. Again, if you have anything else or any other like points of feedback, changes, I'd love to hear it. Obviously this was just kind of the baseline that I came up with, but you guys have definitely made some like awesome suggestions, and I think this would be very useful in creating proper disclosures to educate people. So if that is it, that's all I really have for this section. So Commissioner Pearson, I'll just turn it back over to you then.
Great, thank you. Wonderful job. Let's see, would folks like to take a bathroom or just a 10-minute break now, or do you want to go through another section and then take a break?
Breaks are good.
Breaks are good.
And
All right.
I'm even happy to go 5 instead of 10.
Okay. Well, how about this? How about we take, it's 11 a.m. right now. How about we take a 5-minute break? So 11:05, we'll get back to work. Okay, thanks. right, let's get back together. Okay. We're back and we are ready to move on to the ready to consume products recommendation. So that's Commissioner Chu.
Okay. Let's see if I can get this to work. Can you see the presentation now?
Yes.
Okay. So I went through a lot of these things, the questions we had. In this presentation, there's going to be some bullet points that have question marks after them. Those are the ones that I kind of thought of as I was doing this and said, well, I don't have a good answer for this. So looking for input on some of those. So ready to consume products, just some general considerations. The Nevada regulations do state that no leftovers may be taken out of the lounge. So that's one thing we have to consider. So that would include purchasing of multi-serving prepackaged items. I had a question of, can a patron purchase flour and roll their own, or are we limiting this to pre-rolls only? And then there's a question about vape cartridges. Would they bring their own pens and buy cartridges? And then I started thinking a little more about cartridges themselves and, well, how many servings are in a single cartridge? You have half a gram of an 80% oil, that's 400 milligrams of THC. Most vape cartridges, I believe, are designed to be used over multiple days. So there's a question here as to, if you purchase a vape cartridge, I don't know how you would expect anyone to finish off a vape cartridge in a single session at a consumption lounge of 400 milligrams of THC. That could be quite debilitating. And so then how do you control any leftover flour or vape coming from these things? And then how do you control outside items being brought into the facility? I mean, if you allow people to bring their own pens, they're probably gonna have a cartridge in there. So how do you deal with that in there? Alcohol cannot be served at the lounge. That is in the rules. I would assume that if this is being treated like a restaurant, then you would need your standard food permits for food safety handling, anyone who's doing these, preparing fresh food. There should be options to serve non-infused items, which would be uninfused beverages. So if somebody is there who is smoking or vaping, they don't necessarily want to have another input of just another infused item. Maybe they just want, just other, Coke, whatever, soft drinks or water that are not infused. Or if, they're there with other people who are also eating, an infused item, maybe they want something else, to snack on as well. So there's a question I would propose to the health department workers are, do you need a food permit if you're selling a single serve prepackaged item for consumption? So something has already been cleared, if that's what their business plan is, hey, I'm only going to serve things that you can buy at a dispensary, just have a place for them to open this up. So you might have something that's attached to a dispensary, maybe, a little cafe or something where you would say, okay, you can buy a dispensary, bring it in here and use that. Do you need a food permit? And I think that's just a question for the health departments. Other considerations or metric, you do need to be able to track the total purchase history from both from the lounges and the dispensary to understand what the overall limits are. And again, you're going to perform a metric transfer at the time of ordering. That's just in case, blocking somebody who may have just purchased close to the limit at a dispensary, and then they're going to go to a lounge, weren't expecting to, as friends that said, hey, let's go down to here. They might have hit their limit as to what they could purchase. So you just need to be able to control all of that. And then there's consideration, how do you control sharing of items? I mean, we've all been to restaurants, we've all been to other things where, you know, food gets passed back and forth between people in the same group. And so how do you control all of this? Then we'll get into testing requirements a little bit later. So prepackaged products are pretty straightforward. In Nevada, a single serving is defined as a maximum of 10 milligrams of THC. They do allow plus or minus 15% of that potency. That's for recreational. Your multi-serving items are at the maximum of 100 milligrams of THC, again, plus or minus 15%. Again, no leftovers can be taken home. You cannot buy this, you know, a multi-serving candy bar and share it with a group, because that would be impossible to track in metric, because you just sold it to a single person. So you can't do that. And so my recommendation here would be just don't allow multi-serving items to be served in a consumption lounge. Now you do have medical patients. They are exempted from the limits. And so the question is, can they sell higher dosage single serving items in a lounge? And then that has its own issues of how do you control sharing of these items, or mistakenly swapping a high potency item with a standard item. And so in that case, you know, one way to try to avoid mixing it up is every customer here is a single transaction. You know, you hand this off to the person who purchased it. They show you a medical card, then you're getting this one over here. But it is just making sure that you're getting the right item into there. And full testing will have already been performed by the labs. The COA should be available if requested. That's the same as a dispensary. Anyone who asks for the certificate of analysis at a dispensary, they're supposed to be able to pull that up. And then similar to alcohol, if you have a prepackaged item, you know, it needs to be opened when sold and handed to the customer, or transferred to a non-sealable serving container. That's, you know, when you go to a bar and you order a beer, they pop the top of the beer open and hand it to you. That's so you can't take this home on you. And again, we're back to this whole vape cartridge, which is, you know, with that higher amount that's in there, how do you deal with that? There are some interesting challenges with freshly prepared products. And, you know, one question is, how do you test to verify the final dosing onto there? Cooking of the product might alter the THC, which decomposes at high temperatures. It can react with other components present, your acids, bases, sugars, anything else that's in the food. And just a reminder that all cooking, in which case when I'm talking about cooking, I'm talking about heating, you're involved in a chemical reaction of some sort. And that may or may not react with the THC that's in there. It's incredibly difficult to predict this. And then we get into homogeneity and how do you keep it from separating. So, for example, like salad dressing or a sauce, you have oil and water layers. Well, THC likes to hang out in the oil, doesn't like water. So it may separate on you into there. So how do you keep the THC suspended and consistent every time it's dispensed? So this is where, you know, we're talking about, you know, let's say they have a bottle of salad dressing that they've infused, and they'll say, okay, I'm going to sell a salad and measure out a certain amount of this dressing. How do you keep that so that one dosage is the same every time you do that? And just something about brewed coffee and tea, it just being aware that the THC oil will often separate and will actually kind of line the mug or container surface. And so in this case, I would discourage a bulk dispenser of coffee or tea for this. You probably want to make a single serving item off of there. Surfactants can help with this, you know, and how you keep an emulsion going. And I would say, you know, how you do this, I would consult a food scientist. And then there's also just the general food safety protocols that are in place. So for testing of the final product, as I said, it's very difficult to test to verify the final dosing. Testing a recipe is going to be difficult, especially if you're trying to accurately measure 10 milligrams in an entire dish or drink. That is a very large item to be trying to push through a laboratory to say, you know, can you measure if there's 10 milligrams in this entire dish? And I said, because it's a very low level and homogeneity, depending on where it is in that dish, it's going to play a very large role, and it's going to cause a lot of errors in that measurement. If you're using an oil and, you know, an infused oil in the cooking process, you can decompose the THC at high temperatures. And current edibles that are going for prepackaged items that are sold in dispensary, we test for the potency. Terpenes, there's a star after L, we'll get into that one. Microbial testing, water activity, and pH are in there. Terpenes are usually removed from edibles. There are some of them that do add them back into there, but that's, I think most of the time it's because they recognize that, you know, the terpenes do have a flavor associated with them, and it does affect the quality or the perceived quality of the final product. If you have certain terpenes in there, that may not be what the flavor profile that they're looking for. There was a proposed regulation I saw last month about removing terpenes from testing, so that's the other reason for the star here, that this might change. The microbial, the reason why we test for that and testing for water activity is that we're making a shelf-stable product. And so we're looking to make sure that something was not contaminated into that product, as it may sit on the shelf for a certain amount of time. It could be weeks or months. Okay, so recommendations for testing. You're gonna have your initial bulk oil. So that gets your standard full testing. So when you do an extraction from the flower, you're looking for potency, metals, pesticides, solvents, terpenes, the microbial analysis, things, all of that. So that has to clear. That would not change. Then I'm suggesting that we dilute that bulk oil down to a final concentration around 1%, because 1% would be 10 milligrams per gram. And I chose that because 1 gram of oil is a reasonable amount to try to dispense out. You know, if it's more concentrated than that one, then you're talking about some very small amounts that you need to dispense out onto your final dish. So I'm suggesting bring this down to about 1% in concentration and submit that for the same testing that a standard edible gets. So that is your potency, your microbial, and you know, you're looking for salmonella, pathogen E. coli, water activity, and then the terpenes would be, as I said, optional, but you know, only because it might be changing. I'm also suggesting the dilution is needed to thin out that oil for easy dispensing, and it could be distortion of surfactants, like for a beverage. And then as a category in metric, you can call it an edible oil or something like that for lounges. So we have that sort of a distinction as to what sort of testing it would be required. And then I'm suggesting we create pre-dose containers or syringes that contain that 1 gram of that oil, so, or whatever it is at 10 milligrams. You know, again, plus or minus 15%. So these will be individual doses of these oil. And so that's a 10 milligram dose. If that is a 1% oil, it'll be 1 gram. And then, as I said, it'd be harder to dispense higher concentrations of oil. You know, if this thing were 10% oil, you try to putting out 1/10 of a gram into your product. I think that would be very difficult to do and not accidentally put in a lot more into there. And then this pre-dosing makes it easier to avoid accidental misdosing of the final product. So you have you know, at the lounges, they're storing, you know, 100 little syringes of these things, and you just pull one out and you add it to your final product. And then I'm also suggesting that if standard food safety protocols are followed, then you do not have to test the final infused products, because if the oil's been tested and is stable, it's cleared everything off of there, then as long as, you know, all your other foods, you're doing your standard, you know, food safety stuff onto there, then you're not testing that final product. For the oil itself, Question was, should there be an expiration date on the oil being used? Your potency can change over time, light exposure. So that should be 6 months or 9 months. I don't know. Can a perishable matrix like butter or other dairy be used for that? And that's that one I would, what sort of expiration date would you want there? And that, again, I would defer to the health department as to whether or not you would allow something like that, or does it have to be, something more like a coconut oil or something that is more shelf stable? What are the storage requirements? As I said, heat can accelerate the decomposition or make an oil go rancid. So you have hot kitchens in there. It does need to be locked up with restricted access. So your fridge or freezer would have to have locks on it, and only certain people will be allowed to access it as needed. You have to do metric inventory checks. So every other component of the marijuana businesses, you have to do a quarterly inventory check and report that to the state. And again, I would just defer to standard food safety protocols for that. And then a fridge or freezer, as I was talking about, put it out to there for restricted access. If it fails, unless it's in a perishable matrix, it should be okay for 1 or 2 days. So I wouldn't necessarily say that would have to be thrown out. The food might have to be thrown out, but if it's in there, then it should be okay for a short term at room temperature. Your final fish or a final dish or drink should be added at the end of the cooking process to avoid, decomposition from high temperatures. As I said, with an oil, as it's in there, we should not be sauteing with it. That is definitely going to be a high enough temperature to cause some problems in there. As I said, it needs to be thin enough to be easily dispensed and distribute. And my single serve dosages to avoid accidental or underdosing is in there. I'm suggesting that no bulk infused products be used. So these are the sauces, dressings, because they might separate on you. And then, again, mix it in the final dish and a pre-portion going at the end. Again, this would simplify metric. In this case, you are transferring 1 syringe of oil and you're not creating multiple items. The other way that metric, if you were to infuse in something else, especially in a bulk thing, you would have to create a new item in metric, say which one you use, went into that one, and then you're transferring off of there. I'm saying at this point, if you just say, hey, I have, as I said, 100 syringes in my stock, I'm just going to, as people order this, I'm just going to transfer 1 syringe of oil to that customer. Some questions here about how to avoid mixing up dishes. I mean, certainly, everyone's been in a restaurant, server comes out, has multiple dishes. Have you gotten the wrong thing? Yeah, I have. Sometimes they say, you have 5 things coming out. They say, okay, who ordered what? On this one, you're trying to deal with that. So you can have servers handing it to the wrong person, could be going out to the wrong table. You can use a tag side of the system, but then how do you avoid a customer who's just swapping tags? Things like that. Information disclosures, I think, was on the list as well. Definitely allergy information needs to be on there. It should include the source of the oil that was used to dilute the cannabis. And this is because, I've some places use coconut oil, and that can be an allergen. I have a friend who is deathly allergic to coconut oil, and I've told him, be very careful as to what you're ordering if you go to a dispensary, to make sure they didn't use some form of coconut oil there. And that source of that oil needs to be disclosed from the supplier. As the standard warnings about THC posted are on the menu, that's what we discussed that earlier, what sort of warnings are on there. I think it needs to explain which portion of the dish is infused, because you can take that 1 gram of oil and you're not going to be able to put it all over the whole dish. They might, do a smaller portion of it. You make a portion of the gravy or whatever it is into there, infuse it into that, and put it into there. So I think people should know which portion of the dish actually is infused, or is it throughout the whole thing. Should be limits on servings. Like alcohol, cannabis affects people differently. It's going to be very difficult to enforce this to provide a good experience for every patron, because some people do have a resistance to it. So recreational limits are 10 milligrams for a single dose, and 100 milligrams for multi-servings. Some customers will have a tolerance built up. Some customers have a genetic intolerance, and so a tiny amount could have a major effect on them. So I'm kind of recommending a 10 milligram dosage for each item. Customers can purchase additional 10 milligram dosage, and maybe some options to offer lower dosages for beginners, or clear instructions to them as to only eat a portion of what they were given. Again, the whole question about medical consumers accessing higher dosages. The risk liability issues of dishes are mixed up. Proper training for staff to recognize when someone has had enough. Again, no sharing of dishes or drinks, and how do you enforce this? Especially if we are, we talked about, limiting access to certain, to your employees in certain areas. If you have a mixed area where someone is bringing infused things into a smoking area because they're part of the same group, and you are having your employees, staying out of there to avoid the secondhand smoke. How do you enforce something like this? Again, we're talking about metrics. That was on the earlier one. Disposal. So all uneaten items must be disposed of per state regulations. So the garbage needs to be locked and under control until disposal is performed. You all know that people go dumpster diving outside of restaurants or the food areas. So just be able to control that. You have other trash. So being able to control what goes where. So other trash cans that are around there, your satellite trash, your outside front trash, do we need to be concerned about that for what people are throwing into there? The disposal requirements are that it be mixed with a material to make it unusable. One question is, can unfinished beverages be poured down the sink? So a lot of liquid, it's very low dosage. That small amount of THC, it goes down here directly into Lake Mead. If you have happy fish, or it's so low that it just gets diluted down in the city that it doesn't really matter that much. This is kind of the summary of what I got here, that prepackaged items are fairly straightforward. If we only allow single serving sizes, as I said, vape cartridges are an interesting hurdle that we should be discussing. For freshly made items, just add a pre-measured cannabis oil at the end to avoid a lot of potential issues in here. We need some policies in place to avoid mistakes, swapping of items, or sharing. And then any novel items, I would leave up to the CCB to approve, because certain things, people could come up with things that don't necessarily have to be shelf stable if they're not being sold in the dispensary. So there are certain things that I'm kind of leaving that open for CCB to approve. So that is about it, and I would welcome discussion points on this. So I guess Commissioner Dupree is first myself.
So this has been really interesting. I have a couple of comments and a couple of questions. So is it already a requirement that they're not allowed to take anything home with them from the consumption lounge, or is that what you're suggesting here?
This is what I was told by the state. I asked the CCB, and they said you cannot take anything out of the lounge.
Okay, because my concern with that is that it might encourage overconsumption, right? If I'm trying to be frugal and, I don't want to waste my money, I might just eat it all and then walk out the door or whatever that may be. So, but if it's already a rule, it's already a rule, but I don't think I love that rule. So, and then just to clarify, is the suggestion to only add the THC oil at plating for individual service?
Right, or just at the end of when the dish is being prepared. I'm trying to keep heat away from that oil. So it's not that we'd be handing a syringe to the consumer, because I think the chef may have some ideas as to how they want that in the food item, whether it's in whipped cream, whether it's in, whatever, the gravy, or whether they're just going to disperse it throughout the plate. I think they have their own ideas as to how they want to do that. So I'm just saying it should be done towards the end.
Sure.
And it should not be exposed to high heat.
Right. Okay. So I think that's good clarification, because I could see chefs like creating their gravy and getting everything ready and then adding the THC at that point and then serving from the gravy with THC in it, which sometimes hot holding is just as high as cook temperatures, and then homogeneity issues as well. So yeah, I think that clarification for at plating or just prior to individual service, not being added to anything that's still being stored in the kitchen, and avoiding that high heat.
Right. So my thought was, you would have whatever portion of that gravy or whatever, measure that out, add the oil to that if you wanted to mix it up into there, and then dispense that entire serving onto the plate, if that's how they wanted to do it.
Okay.
Try not to put too many restrictions on it, but just to avoid the heat at the end.
Would it be acceptable in your opinion so maybe I'm the chef, I want to add it to the gravy just like you said, so I'm going to scoop out the gravy that I'm going to use for this dish, I'm going to add the THC oil, mix it up, and then drizzle that gravy over the top. Can I then still use this same mixing container to do the next dish? Can I then or is there a concern that there's residual from the previous and then it could keep building up in that mixing dish?
That is a possibility.
Okay, so it would need to be each mixing container would need to be fresh for each service. So we'd have to find an elegant way of ensuring that. You had a note about locking the fridges and the freezers. From a safety standpoint, I would just recommend that we don't add that feature for walk-ins, because there have been instances of people getting stuck in walk-in fridges or walk-in freezers, and that is not a good situation to be in. Although rare, we want to reduce the likelihood of that happening at all. So anything that a person can be inside, I don't think that should be locking from the outside.
Sure. I would think this would be a smaller fridge or freezer because you shouldn't be having that much stock. I guess you could have stock in there, but there is a requirement for security wise from the state for everyone else that these items be locked up.
Sure.
Okay.
And then my only other kind of more for discussion comment was that I think I would lean on the side of not enforcing a limit per patron. I think you wrote out a lot of reasons why that could be unenforceable, and might make the consumption lounge not as enticing to customers, right? Businesses might not like that. So I like the idea of, making it very clear to the customers that 10 milligrams is a single serving, and then having all of the options very clear on how many milligrams are in each option, whether it's a food item, whether it's a dab, whether it's a, any version, and then let the customers make good decisions for themselves, as long as we provide them the information about how much they're consuming, how much is recommended, and health effects.
Okay.
I think post recommended serving, amounts, and then we have to know amount per item, and then health effects, which we are already involved. But I think if we give give those three types of information to customers, I think that they'll have what they need to make good choices.
Sure. I guess to tie it back to what Commissioner Nelson had on there, I think she posted something about the current recommendations. I think from the state said, take a small and edible and wait 2 hours. I think that is a long time to be in a lounge, I think, personally, but I guess people could make a whole day event of this, but I would think that, 2 hours is a long time in a restaurant. So I think there's some interesting things there about, recognizing how long it can take for it to affect you and how long people would be expected to be in a lounge.
If you're high, you might want to hang out.
That's true. If you're high, you should hang out.
All right. Those are all my notes. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you. I didn't see who was next, but I'm just going to go down on my thing. So Commissioner Pearson.
Yeah, perhaps a naive question, but you're mentioning metric and the challenges with making sure that people keep within their individual limit for sales. I'm wondering, is the purpose of the metric limits to reduce the likelihood of reselling outside of the dispensary environment?
I'm not sure what the limits are in there. There are no limits if you're a medical patient, I believe.
Right.
Actually, the daily limit is about 3,500 milligrams, even inclusive to medical patients. So if a medical patient purchases at a dispensary and they're buying edibles, they can purchase no more than about 3,500 milligrams. And I think that's right, but that's what I've researched before. So.
Okay. Does anyone know why that?
Is that in a single day, or is that in like a 2-week period?
I believe that's the daily limit. So, but I can do some additional research on that to confirm.
I guess I'm bringing this up because from a public health perspective, the only kind of thing, the thing that makes the most sense to me is just concern that someone's going to go into a dispensary, buy a bunch of products and go outside and resell it to underage people specifically, right? And so if that is the case, if that is the purpose of the metric individual sales limits, then the fact that people can't bring products outside of the lounge kind of negates that concern. So therefore, we wouldn't also need to be concerned about sharing products, for example, between people, because it's like, okay, this one person bought X amount, this other person bought X amount, and Joe is suddenly right up against his limit. Like, he's not going to go, if he can't take it out, he can't resell it. So, I would be interested to know, perhaps we should talk to CCB about what's the motivation there. But if it truly is about just reducing likelihood of reselling, then I think we can recommend that, it is important to know that, this 10 milligram or this one gram dispenser of oil left the lounge and went to customer B, but I don't know that the connection to how much customer B bought is necessary, and that would just simplify a lot of things too.
Okay, yeah, I will ask the CCP for their input on that.
And relatedly, also, is homogeneity important for a plated dish? So that's where I kind of asked, that in the disclosures that they tell people where which portion of this is infused. Right. And so people can understand, because you have other people that are counting the calories for whatever reason as well, right? So they may say, hey, I'm going to avoid, the starches that are in here, or, they could be, partially diabetic, things like that. And so trying to avoid certain things onto there. I don't want to eat this portion of what it comes with. Or, if it's a pasta dish, you may say you're going to just eat the sauce. But it's kind of important to know where they infuse it, because this is 1 gram of oil trying to be dispersed throughout an entire thing. So I think it's just making sure that they understand where is it. I agree with you. I guess homogeneity within the part of the dish that is infused as long as the total dose is 10 milligrams on that dish, and it's like,
Right.
okay, sauce. Do I care if, you know, the first part of this of the sauce coming out of the dispenser has more concentration than the last part? I don't know that we do. You know, if it just gets
Right. Yeah, I don't think so. I'm considering this as a single item. So same thing like in a dispenser, you have a single serving item, you know, where you might have, you know, a cookie that has an infused frosting on there. When it's tested, we mash up the whole thing, knowing it's in there, and we test it. But it's also known that it's only in the frosting.
Yep. Okay, I think we're on the same page. Thank you. I also just want to know that we want to keep an eye on the time. So maybe let's try to limit discussion to the next 10 minutes.
Okay. So I guess Commissioner Hayes.
I will share with you that your question about the dairy and the butter would have to go to not the health department but the Nevada Department of Agriculture. They would also do ice cream. So we should defer to them on any butter or dairy questions.
So defer to the Department of Ag and not the health department, or just
not the health department. So we have our side, which is more hands-on retail, and their side, which is dairy. They have an entire lab for that. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Then anything else, Commissioner Hayes? And then I guess Commissioner Nelson.
Hey, so Ben, good job on the presentation. I thought you brought up a lot of really great points. A few notes. So one, I think that limiting the plated servings to be 10 milligrams, kind of continuing on to what Commissioner DePreet said, I think that would do a disservice to the patrons of a consumption lounge, just because everybody's tolerance and preference is so different. Educating people that 10 milligrams is a good dose for most people is a great idea, but I think that consumption lounges should be able to prepare doses to the request of what a consumer is asking for, and that could even be less than 10 milligrams. I know a lot of people that consume 5 milligrams in one sitting, and that's a happy dose for them. I know people that consume 50. So being able to allow consumption lounges to produce plates to what a consumer requests, I think would be the best tactic for this. Also to note on that, most edibles that are sold at dispensaries right now are multi-serving edibles, and I think that's kind of just essentially proving my point that people are obviously consuming more than just 10 milligrams in a sitting, so we should answer to what the consumer demand is. Also with regard to serving, our plated food items that are infused with THC at a consumption lounge, will they have to be marked with the same symbols that are required on prepackaged edibles in Nevada? So as producers, we have to put a THC stamp on each of the edibles that we make, or each serving of an edible that we make. So would consumption lounges be subject to the same sort of marking requirements? Also, too, would it be beneficial if we consider the idea of multi-serving edibles being able to be served? Would it make sense that if someone orders a plate of infused foods, should the plate be marked with what that dosing is for that plate? So if somebody orders a 50 milligram serving of, let's just say, like spaghetti, should we say on the plate it has to be marked that it says 50 milligrams? And that might help avoid any accidental consumption or mixing plates. People know what they're getting at that point. Also, to your points with metric, I thought were very valid, because this could get very, very messy with a consumption lounge maybe just having like a bulk amount of, let's say, like can butter. They have 1,000 grams of can butter, and if they're trying to serve this out to 1,000 different servings, how is Metric going to mark that? Are they going to have to require tags of every serving of cannabis that goes out? These are things that obviously may make consumption lounge serving very messy, but it should definitely be addressed prior to getting our recommendations to the CCB. And the last thing about dumping things down the drain, THC is a fat, and so what we've noticed in our work as a production manufacturing facility, grease traps actually filter out a lot of those oils, and fat and THC kind of gets caught up in it. So we just wanted to add that. So.
Okay. That's good. Thank you. That's information to know. All right. So I got marking of the items, allowing customers to specify the dosage. And so then this would be to then allow multi-serving prepackaged items. The only thing about the marking of the items, I thought that was mainly for when you have it at your home.
Mm-hmm.
That you don't get things mixed up, right? You know that, hey, this is something that, kids should not be available to them, or someone else coming into your home that has, picked something up from there. In a lounge, I would think you've got the entire purpose of being there is that I think I would assume that anything you pick up in a lounge is going to have THC in it.
Yeah, but we could also have consumers who order uninfused plates and are just there for the social aspect to be with their friends. So
true, right? I guess I was talking about the actual item itself.
Okay, sorry, my
but I guess if it was a prepackaged item, it would already have it on there, right? Because I don't think you would make these. I mean, would you ever make something separate for a lounge versus what goes to a dispensary?
Mr. Nelson, are you thinking about like a plated like pasta or like a plated like lunch meal dish to be marked with like a little metal piece on the side that says like 5 for 5 milligrams or 10 for 10 milligrams? Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, I think that could be effective. Just some sort of way that like the dishes are marked with what the dosing is of that dish. So whether that be like, it's marked on the plate with edible ink, or it's got a flag on it, something of that nature to help indicate that, hey, this product has THC in it, and this is how much THC is in this product. Because I assume that these dishes are not going to be served like packaged. They're not going to have the same sort of label requirements that other edibles in the state have. But given that's the case, we obviously need to be able to communicate to consumers what they're getting and make it like readily known, so there isn't like swapping plates or it minimizes the risk of mistakes happening.
So
yeah,
go ahead.
Good. So I'm fine with marking what the dosage is. I thought you were talking about that stamp that has to go on every item.
Oh, sorry. I did have a question of that too.
Sorry.
I guess the thing is, like, should we make it to where consumption lounges are exempt from having that stamp?
Right. I think we could probably exempt them from that stamp, just given that, while there might be, I think the fact that it's being open on site there and you know what you're getting, I think that there's THC in there. Granted, yes, there are certain ones that, as I said, if we should open this up to having other options for uninfused items, and I guess you don't want to get that mixed up. But if we're saying none of this can leave the lounge anyway, and I would think I would probably enforce that for any food item at the lounge, just so you don't have to deal with that, then you may not need that marking itself.
On the food side of things, we require a menu marking for undercooked meats and no menu marking for not undercooked meats, right? So we could do something similar to that, like the THC infused items have the stamp, and then if they're offering non-infused items, then it's not stamped on the menu itself.
Yeah, it should be marked on the menu itself. So much like a consumer advisory, if you have an undercooked product, you say confuser, there's a little star. Maybe it should have that symbol right there that says, this is a product, that isn't infused, and it is plus or minus 10%, like Colorado did, about how close to that 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams that it is. In addition, if meals are served in several courses, you have a soup course, a salad course, a main menu and a dessert course. When you order at the beginning of the meal, you should be able to add up how many doses you're getting at that time so you can follow along for your own. And perhaps it should be a requirement that you get your own copy of the menu. And at the end, they have added up for you how much you're getting out of the entire meal, everything you eat, everything you drink, everything you consume. And that would be, a little bulky. Some other people have done it. But I think much in line with consumer advisory, this would be a great way to go.
Right. I think that's a good idea. There are certainly, restaurants out there where you're kind of ordering a la carte and actually have the customer mark what they want. I've seen this in like sushi restaurants, things like that. You mark what you want off of there. I think it would also help with communication if you are going to state on there as to how many milligrams you want, especially if we still have a mask mandate in place and someone says 15 and the server interprets that as 50. That can be very hard to tell the difference behind a mask, and especially in probably a noisy place. So I think it would be helpful to, for liability as well, is just the consumer has written down exactly how much they want. Because then same thing, if they just tell you, hey, I'm good with 50 onto there, and they're really a beginner and they're only going to that one because someone else in the party has pushed them to that. I've certainly seen that in restaurants where you set what heat level you want. You get kind of goaded on by the other people in your party as to what you can handle. But if you have that written down by the consumer, then at least the lounge has a document that you can say, this is what you asked for, and this is what we provided. So. Okay. Any other comments? These are all great feedback on here. So.
Thank you. This was very complete.
Okay.
And you had a very large area to consider, but fabulous job.
Thank you.
So next up, just looking at the time, we only have an hour left and we have 2 more sections and public comment to take. If you do need to step away to use the restroom, please just go ahead and do that. But I think we're going to continue through and move on to the occupational health and training recommendations.
Okay, I will share my screen. I've actually been deleting slides as we go because other topics have kind of covered it more in depth than I did. So mine should not take very long. Here we go. Can you guys see that okay? All right. So I just went through the outline. So for notices for employees, I am suggesting that we model what's required for food handlers. So there are 5 reportable illnesses and 5 symptoms that if any employees have been diagnosed with or are experiencing, they are not allowed to come into work. This is an example from SNHD. So your 5 reporting symptoms are here. We've got the images and the 5 illnesses. Not everybody remembers the 5 illnesses. Not everybody remembers the 5 symptoms, which is why I like the idea of having it as required signage that wouldn't need to be visible by the public, just for the employees. This would reduce the likelihood of foodborne illness outbreaks or any other outbreaks that are basically hand to mouth, like fecal oral stuff. Since, putting food in your mouth and putting a joint in your mouth seem pretty similar to me in terms of illness transmission. So I would recommend that. Secondhand smoke effects. So Commissioner Nelson covered this really well. I think this should be, if it's already visible for the customers. Sorry, my brain didn't work for a second. Then it doesn't need to be repeated here. I like the idea of potentially, I mean, I don't know that I've seen this before in notices, but I don't know why we couldn't add a QR code to a web page that maybe CCB or somebody, or to a CDC page or something like that, that gives more information. A lot of these notices, we want them to be vague and easy to understand, right? Like this could have health effects, but there's a lot more information behind it, which is evident in all of these conversations. So it might be something new that we could try, to just add a QR code to an established page. And then we just have that visible for patrons to take a look at as they walk in. And then air quality has been discussed at length. I'm essentially kind of echoing what Chair Pearson has put out. Find a way to monitor the real-time PM 2.5 levels in that main entrance or service counter area, the smoke-free area. And then I think that should be visible to the patrons who are coming in, right? It's not just the employees who are exposed to it, the patrons, the inspectors who come through, the fire department who comes through, and then to have a way to interpret that PM 2.5 level. So to have like a color chart that says, you know, this range is green, this range is yellow, this range is red. I think that would be helpful to customers, to inspectors, to anybody else who needs to walk in, as well as to the employees who are obviously exposed the most. And that would have to include a requirement to maintain and calibrate those devices per manufacturer directions. I think as a public health committee, I'm happy to err on being a little too strict on this side of things, and then the board itself can compromise as needed. But I think this would be a really helpful tool to have for anybody who walks in the building, especially knowing how harmful secondhand cannabis smoke can be, as we've discussed in previous meetings. That's an example of the health policy handout that we could, you know, in drafting the language, we can just kind of describe this, something similar. As far as certifications and licenses, I think for all, of course, the registered agent card that's required. Also, I would recommend creating a cannabis consumption training license similar to your alcohol awareness card. And I think all employees should have those two items. For lounges, for employees who are working in lounges that serve food or beverages, I imagine some might not. So the ones that do, I think we should require a food handler card and the food safety protection manager at all hours of operation as well. That is not very different from existing regulations. And then this is a copy of the NRS that explains the development of the alcohol awareness program. And it talks about, I know it's quite small here, but it describes what it should include. I'm adding here in red sexual assaults. I think that's important. And then I think that we could kind of have a conversation if there are other things that we would want to, of course, like swap alcohol for cannabis, but then other, you know, items that we would want to include, or maybe items here that don't apply as much on the cannabis side of things. I think I'd be open to ideas, but otherwise I think this gives a really great framework for how to develop this. And the way that they did it for alcohol, judging by this, is that the commission itself created the training. And, you know, even set forth the amount of money that it would cost and that sort of thing, how it would be available. So I think these are good things to consider. And I hope that the board would be amenable to producing an education training like this. And then cleaning of devices was kind of tacked on, and I know that we didn't discuss it a lot. So from the research that I've done, I would like to recommend the one-use model, which some dispensaries use, or excuse me, consumption lounges use, where all the devices are provided to each party brand new, and the party walks out with the device. That's obviously the lowest option. From what I was seeing, I mean, I know that food contact surfaces are required to be smooth and easily cleanable, and each section, especially for items that are going from customer to customer, and each item that we require has to be accessible to be brushed, right? So if you have any bottles, like sometimes restaurants have the big water bottles, we require that they have a brush that they can get in and clean them out. A lot of the devices that I'm seeing are not smooth and easily cleanable. Some of them have small, inaccessible, passageways within the glass that you wouldn't be able to scrub. I looked at some of the federal agencies. FDA discourages the use of alternative sanitization. So they made it very clear that ozone and UV are not approved for sanitization of CPAPs, which I think is an interesting kind of comparison, because of course they don't have recommendations. CDC and FDA don't have recommendations for how to clean your bong or anything. But I figured a CPAP was a pretty comparable device, since it's, breathing in through this device. And they are discouraging against UV and ozone for a variety of reasons outlined in that link. They recommend soap and water to clean a CPAP. I think we would also need a sanitization step for something that's not personal use, right? And I think that would have to be a food grade sanitizer, which is, there are a handful that are common, and then there are a couple others. I did see, it seems like alcohol is the preferred method for cleaning some of these devices. That's been temporarily approved by EPA as a food grade sanitizer for the supply chain concerns of COVID right now. So I don't know if that would be continued to be approved afterwards. So I would recommend the one use model. If we or CCB decide to allow for reuse and requiring the cleaning of devices, I've added those bottom two bullets for consideration of things to kind of take into account when moving forward on that. But I'm open to ideas or suggestions here. Like I said, there was not a lot of background discussion on this. I'm not sure where we all lie. I think what's easiest is one use model. I don't know how industry would feel about that, but I think that reduces a lot of risk and liability in terms of the individual consumption lounges, especially knowing that these devices are not smooth and easily cleanable, and microbes love to hang out in secret little hidey holes. And I don't know that we have a good approved method of cleaning them and sanitizing them and ensuring their safety from party to party. So that's all I have. And I am, let me switch view here. Open to suggestions. I don't know if I can see your hands raised in this view, if you have them raised. Oh, now I can. Okay. Commissioner Hayes, I see your hand up.
Me and my mute button. So not every jurisdiction has a food safety card. So if we are going to do this statewide, we're going to have to figure out how to bring a card like that to them. We don't have one. We just have the certified food manager. Washoe County has eliminated theirs, and Carson City never had one at all. So that could be a challenge bringing that to others. It is not as implementable as, you guys already have a set level for that. So that is going to be a challenge, I think. I think there are a lot of trainings out there. When I was doing my homework, there are about 150 different visions of what constitute training. ServSafe has 2 already. ServSafe, and I'm not sure if you spell it, IMEPIK had one. There's a cannabis for professionals certificate, those kinds of things. And to get off the ground, we recognize some of those items as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel ourselves. Things that are online in a class, can be done on Zoom, especially in the era of COVID. But we rely on some of these already pre-created programs because there's honestly 150 of them.
So that's great information. I didn't realize not all jurisdictions have them. Cannabis Core, ServSafe, and all of these initials over here, you use those instead of a food handler card, or are you thinking instead of the cannabis training?
In addition, so if you're going to have food, you would have to have ServSafe, or some a recognized certified food manager program.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of it, there are an awful lot of certifications for core curriculum that would also need to be done. So when we get into the training section, we'll be talking about all of those, different things you should be learning about, but it is going to be a significant list of required trainings.
So can you list them here so I can add them?
Okay.
I don't know which ones are the same as others.
Let me go back to this one. Okay, so
and which ones are interchangeable?
Okay, so security procedures, emergency procedures, record keeping procedures, quality control, hazards analysis, proper use of equipment. It's in a significant list.
So those are the items within the trainings.
Yeah.
And
so at the minimum, they should start out with ServSafe or some sort of CFM.
Yeah.
The
so
minimum,
you're proposing each individual in the facility has a ServSafe, not just one person per shift?
you could do that, but the rest of them would have to have somebody with that training would have to train others and keep a record of that training. So it may not be through ServSafe, but even if it's a one-page diagram, a one-page training like we do with a lot of OSHA trainings every day, every week or something, you get one training. You could go through that one, have people sign it, so that they have their training, much like we do in manufactured food.
Okay. And then the topics that you listed here, were you pulling those from Cannabis Core or
So
where did that come from?
So part of this is from a list from the California Manufactured Food Medical Cannabis Manufacturing has an entire list of trainings. And I can show you that later. And I can even send you this document, which was really good. And then NEHA also has a significant list of trainings. So I was really great to see NEHA getting ahead of the power curve. So you'll see the list of things we can talk about.
Okay. And those are items that should be covered in the cannabis consumption training license, or if they already exist, could be in lieu of, whether it's us developing our own or there's one that already is equivalent. Pick your favorite. Okay. I think I am.
I would not want to put us in a position of having to create our own courses. You get into issues with whether or not we are educated enough to provide those courses. So when they are created by educators, I think we are better off.
Okay. And let me just include the options, Cannabis Core. Okay, perfect. And then I think I just realized that I missed a page here for the training, the employees, but also for the lounges. I wanted to add for each lounge to have a written plan on how they would handle a customer who's incapacitated and at risk of assault, sexual or otherwise. And then do we like the idea of also having, because one of the items on the outline for me to cover was driving under the influence. Do we also want a written plan for how a lounge would handle that? We could include that here. Okay, I see some thumbs up in the crowd. Commissioner Hayes, did you have other comments?
No,
did I cut you off
sorry.
early? Okay.
I didn't lower my hand.
No worries. Chair Pearson.
Yes, so for the devices, the cleaning of devices, I I'm all over the place. I'm sure there are people, I'm sure there's public comment out there. People might have opinions. I'm concerned that the one-use model will limit modes of administration and therefore limit who is able to use lounges. And I'm very sensitive to one of the reasons we want lounges is to allow people to have a place where they can use legally where they might not otherwise be able to use legally, right? If they don't own their own home, if people don't allow consuming cannabis in their, their rental, for example. So, I'm imagining, for example, someone purchasing a new, like a single serving, like a disposable vape pen. Okay, fine, doable. But what if someone uses a volcano-like device, right? Or like a plume-like device? Those things are expensive. Like I can't just, it's not a disposable device. So I'm wondering if we can figure out a way to allow people to bring in their own stuff, but requiring that employees check it so that it doesn't have any flour, liquid, etc. in it. The device needs to be independent of the cannabis product. I think that would be a lot easier. And then, hey, if people want to just show up to a lounge and they want to buy a pipe because they don't want to smoke a joint, or if they want to buy a volcano or whatever they want to do, fine. But we're not requiring them to do that. What do people think about that? I see clapping.
I'm open to it. I see Commissioner Hayes raised her hand again. Go ahead.
I was on mute. So.
Oh.
So I did a little homework on devices, and I had no idea how many kinds of different devices there were out there. I was literally amazed. But some of these, I'm going to use words I don't know anything about: stewed garden glass, gravity hookahs, things like that. Moose Labs has a mouthpiece that is silicone. And so if you have one of those large devices, I think that Ms. Pearson was discussing earlier, that is a shared device, that you should be able to buy dispensables so that they transfer. So you have your own personal device with a filter, and then it comes off, and then it goes on to the next. So then the hose or whatever, how it works, goes on to the next person. So I think they're starting to come out with those things.
Yeah, I don't know. For example, for a hookah, the mouthpiece is only part of the problem. It's the hose also.
Okay.
So, some things, a hookah just might not be it. I don't know. I think that if people bring in their own shareable device and keep it to sharing within their party, I don't have a problem with that. I don't know if there's liability issues or something like that we have to consider. But to me, that's no more risky than what a person would do at home with their friends. So I think that's fine. And it's really, I think the summary, just my own experience with doing human administration of tobacco products on campus here is that there's really not a lot you can do to clean things that people inhale through. It's really hard. So I think not having lounges have to clean them would make life a lot easier. So either single use or bring in your own.
Right. By the time I got to the end of my research, and it was just, I'm pretty convinced it was just the surface of it. It was either bring your own device and use your own device and don't share your own device, or buy a single service and throw it in the garbage afterward.
Right.
But there was no cleaning. I got to no place where there was cleaning. there was single service pieces that could be used, but there would be no cleaning of them. That's what I was pretty convinced of.
Okay, yeah. And there might be single service pieces that will allow a lounge to offer something like a hookah. Maybe I'm just not aware of them. And I had something else to say too. What was it? Oh, it's gone now. Shoot. Oh, just that when people leave, they would have to show that the device is empty because they're not allowed to leave, right? So empty your pipe, clean out your, dump out your reservoir on your vape pen, whatever. That's doable too. And thank you. That's it. And great job, Commissioner Dupree. Wonderful. This is hard.
Thank you. Commissioner Nelson?
Hey, again, to follow up to Commissioner Pearson's compliment, I thought your presentation was really well done. I guess I just had a question on what is the current acceptable SOPs at hookah lounges for what they do to clean hookahs? Because I know to your point, obviously pipes and vaporizers, they have a lot of small parts. But hookahs do as well. So I'm wondering if there's any research out there of what might be acceptable to clean and reuse devices to those same standards.
Yeah, I agree that would be an interesting comparison. I don't know that hookah is regulated by anyone in terms of health and safety, right? I couldn't find anything on CDC and FDA in terms of, maybe I didn't go too in depth into hookah specifically. I can certainly do that. I know it's not something that we regulate unless they have alcohol or food. We don't touch the hookah side of things. I don't know if it was existing and big tobacco was already existing and that sort of thing. I'm not sure, but I agree that would be an interesting comparison.
I would bet money that there are no cleaning requirements for hookahs. I would.
And I wouldn't want to repeat that now that we have the ability to put some recommendations in place. But if there are cleaning protocols that we could incorporate, I'm open to that.
That makes a lot of sense.
Other comments? No. Okay. Commissioner Chu?
Just a question about the hookah. And this is a great presentation as well. Is a hookah going to imply that multiple people are sharing the same marijuana or THC product?
Usually, right?
In which case, how do you, right? And so the question would be, how are you tracking this? It's only going to go, one person's going to make the purchase, right, in metric. So there's that question that's out there, as opposed to individual other vaping products as well. And then again, as you talked to, I think I mentioned before that, a single vape cartridge is going to have a lot of THC in there. And is there going to be a lot more waste at that point? Or are people going to complain about, well, I just spent, X dollars on this, and now you're telling me I have to throw this away, what's left of it? There could be some interesting conversations around that.
So I'm not familiar with metric. Is there a requirement for the establishment to track the THC consumed by each individual?
So at the dispensary level, you're making a purchase and it gets tracked there as to who it was sold to at that point of sale. So Commissioner Nelson may know better than I do. I'm on the testing side, so I don't see that side of this. But I believe it's tracked at every stage, every time a transfer is made. So whether that is from the flower to the producers to the dispensary, they track it there, and then at the final point of sale, it is also tracked to see how much an individual person is purchasing of that.
So it sounds like the requirements stop at point of sale, potentially.
Yes. At the dispensary level, they track how many milligrams a person is purchasing, and their total purchase has to be less than 3,500 milligrams between, I believe, between all forms of cannabis. So there's calculations of forming that with flower and edibles, so on and so forth. So to your point, Commissioner Dupree, if the dispensary standards are the tracing stops at the point of sale, it may be a little bit excessive to try to then trace after that of what each person is individually consuming. I'm not sure if that's necessarily what's needed to maintain industry safety.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful because I agree it's going to be hard just in general to track what each individual is consuming. So if that's not an explicit requirement, I think that makes it easier on us for recommendations for it. But yeah, I think hookah would be hard just in general. I did notice some questions in the chat. Do you want me to go over those? Or Commissioner Chu, do you have another point? And I cut you off? No, okay.
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Let's address the questions in the chat during public comment.
Okay. Then if there aren't any other comments, thank you so much for the feedback so far. And I think we can incorporate those to help kind of firm these up a bit. And I'll hand it over. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So now we're on to our last section here with Commissioner Hayes. Finishing strong.
You're muted still.
I just lost the button to help me get remote control so I can show the documents I found.
Oh, yeah, Zoom always likes to hide the buttons that you need. Are you in some sort of like full screen mode or anything like that?
Full screen. All right, I am now.
Don't be in full screen. And if you just move your cursor to the bottom of the Zoom webinar view, you should see a share screen button pop up.
Can you see something?
Yes, got it.
Okay. So I went into this thinking there would be no information out there. I was so wrong. There is a lot of information. One of my favorite places is the National Environmental Health Association that has prepared food safety guidance for cannabis products. This was such a comprehensive document that, except for a couple of items, I saw a lot of benefit in borrowing with respect. A lot of the stuff in here, and it had a comprehensive list except for two things that I think should go in here. This is an available document on the website. I was also hoping that at some point we could get Neha to come in and speak with us about this document if we have time for that later. So this is, they have some training online. What I found very encouraging about this document is that it also takes you to links where specific states have specific information that they thought was a leader in that group with that information. And so they had already compiled it for you. These types of documents can get really complicated. It does talk about what each state does with, all 29 states, that do this, and how many different kinds of edibles they are. So the training could be pinpointed to what you do. So maybe a cannabis consumption lounge only does infused cocktails. They have a level for that. It was only packaged products. They had a level for that. And I guess I didn't realize how many different versions there were of how you could get this. I also learned about, improper growing conditions. So that this starts, we also, we work with both things like E. coli and Salmonella and Shigella and all these different things. But we have to start back when we're doing the training at the growing, because of aflatoxins and mold and storage, and how molds and humidity can be grown in storage after it's packaged. So that was important. So diseases from mold, mildew, and bacteria in it, with all this other stuff that we normally do. So food safety topic areas would be storage and sanitation, collection and testing, laboratory accreditation, tracking, transporting, and distribution, serving size and homogeneity. And these are all things we've talked about all day. So as we went through talking about these things, I'm like, oh yeah, there's a training topic for that. Oh yeah, there's a training topic for that. So I think they've done a really good job thinking about it, except for those two things I talked about. And I'm going to add 11 and 12 to the end of this list. Labeling and packaging, education and training, food safety plans, which is more of a manufactured food item. That will go with people who needed those HACCP plans. So then there would need to be HACCP training. So that, again, multiple levels of training. Waste disposal. Hadn't really thought about waste disposal other than throwing things in the garbage, but now you're throwing a different level of hazardous waste into the mix. And we may need to discuss that with NDEP. And when Commissioner Tu talked about security of that garbage, I'm like, yep, somebody thought about that. And the regulatory considerations. So what this document does go through and recommends language, and then tells you where the best language is to steal from those documents, steal with respect. The two things I do not think this food safety topic areas covers is staff safety and devices. Those are the two things I had. So I would add staff safety and devices to the bottom of this list. So when we go into storage, lighting, ventilation, temperature, humidity, and space are all really important. Some of the things we already do, which is pest and rodent-free spaces, storage area, and security precautions for over 21. I thought the refrigerator comment was very interesting from before, because I didn't think, based on my reading here, that a lot of it would be in a refrigerator, that the storage conditions would have to be based so that the product itself did not grow mold. And I liked the idea of having, an amount of gravy, and you mix those two immediately, because when you mix them together immediately, you do not have time for those chemical reactions to happen later. So I would like to learn more about storage of these products and how that could, affect how we write regulation and what we add to regulation. Labeling requirements, contamination, storage separation for multiple deliveries. Part of what we're seeing right now is that like a food facility, and I'm just going to bring it up, Dottie's. Dottie's has a main manufacturing facility, and then they take food to each individual Dottie's, and that happens statewide. And so how are we going to, do this when they want to have one main production site and then transfer it to another location? Would these regulations make sure it had to be produced on site? And I don't know if that's possible all the time. So that got me thinking about transportation difficulties, certainly inside the state, and it wouldn't be possible to cross the state line. So when you started talking about examples of strong state regulations, this link takes you right to the regulation that you would need to use that they thought were the best ones. So I thought this was a really great document. Oregon also had some good ones. So then when you get to collection and testing, what I learned, especially when we were doing some of the hemp stuff, is that I no longer know how to read a testing document. So this particular section, you have to actually have training on how to read those documents. Uniform sampling methods. When we get into food manufacturing, we start recognizing what testing methods are really good and what testing methods are really poor. We would also have to have a level of instruction where we were teaching that. And so this document actually had some examples of what a certified analysis looks at. But then there were multiple levels. There's dry, and there's infused, and there's liquid, and there's not liquid, and all of these different things. So this would have to be a very big part of our training, because I was looking at these documents going, I don't even know what I'm looking at. So I think we're going to have to get somebody from a lab to come in and help us, especially develop this portion where we're looking at these documents. Example 5 for a concentrated, and the documents just got more and more and more complicated. And then lab accreditation. Of course, we have an accredited lab here. Can everybody create their own lab? Are you going to have to go to a certified lab? We are going to have to know about those lab testings and which ones we're going to have to create lists where these labs are approved and these labs are not. So it got even more complicated. So regulations or considerations for regulation would be requiring laboratories to test to be ISO accredited, requiring labs to test to have the same accreditation, requiring to validate their test results, requiring accreditation for third parties, which third-party accreditation, especially for inspections, is the new and upcoming thing, especially for manufactured food products. Colorado had strong regulations in regards to this, and I thought they were so good, there was no point in recreating the wheel, that we could go borrow some of these. So for the training programs, this is a significant list, and this is only half the list. So the training would be required within 30 days of employment, health and safety standards, health hazards presented by solvents or chemicals used at the premises, emergency procedures, and I'm sure that they would cover things like, somebody passing out in a facility, how to get, and then I started thinking about it. How do you get emergency responders in there? And how do you get them into that room safely? If they had to have, scuba gear on their face in order to go in. Security procedures, how to keep stuff locked down, record keeping requirements, training requirements. And, Lauren and I discussed earlier how one person in the facility could have that training and then take small pieces out of it and make sure everybody gets that training over time. Overview of the process so that they understand the whole process, hazards analysis, and of course this would be, based on what it is you do. A busboy may not need the same training as a chef. Proper usage of equipment and machinery, based on my reading, residue and cross-contamination from residue, which can transfer molds into other food products, became a big deal. So more work on cross-contamination or cross-contact, especially with allergens, would also be necessary. Safe work practices to an employee's jobs or tasks, cleaning and maintenance, emergency operations, including shutdown, which got me to thinking about how many different permit levels there could be when we start doing the inspections. The inspections would have to be based on your permit level. So whether or not you are doing what we would call full service, or whether or not everything is ready to eat packaged, there would have to be multiple levels. Any information reasonable to the employee's job duties. Additionally, a licensee that produces edible cannabis products shall ensure that all personnel who prepare, handle, or package edibles successfully complete the food handler core course by ANSI. ANSI is the person we recognize through food. So anything that is ANSI accredited, we recognize already in the food code, which is a great place to start and not reinventing the wheel. And that would happen within 90 days of employment. So some things you would have to have pretty quickly, and other things could take time. And we could also base that on what you did there. And I think that would help, people grow in their employment, and make sure they have that information right off. Also, what I thought was important was annual refresher training. Certified food managers is somewhere, depending on which accreditation you get, is 3, 5, or 8 years. I think that it is important that annual refresher training must be completed every 12 months here. Information, especially with this, is growing so quickly and so fast that just like food safety, you would need annual refreshers. And attestation. It doesn't mean that they could not bring training from one place to the next. So they work at Cannabis Consumption Lounge A, instead of it just being a training that just stays with the facility, but that training should be transferable to other facilities. I thought was very important. And then of course, based on your jobs. The code for Colorado got way more in depth. So when they started talking about certification training, core curriculum, they had specific topics. So I think when we start stealing with respect, it should be from Colorado. So when they were discussing marijuana's effects on the human body, they were very specific. Physical effects, the amount of time to feel impairment, visible signs, recognizing the signs of impairment, sales to minors, acceptable forms of identification. And these are not things I would have thought of before. How to check an identification, spotting false identification, fraudulent identifications, common mistakes, those kinds of things. I wouldn't have even thought about half of this stuff. But going out and looking at other people's lives was like, wow, that's really important. So there's also waste disposal and having that locked down. And, when Mr. Chu started talking about that, I'm like, yeah, I think that is where we need to ask NDP and their solid waste and hazardous waste about how we could do this safely, because right now, garbage is not always locked down. They have chintzy latches and anybody can crawl over the wall, and dumpster diving is a thing. And we would not want to mix anything with those products that could result in an even more harmful outcome than just stealing food from a garbage can. So I really thought these were really great, was a really great comprehensive list. It did not need, none of these talked about staff safety. So we would have to make sure that they had masks and gloves and coveralls and, knew about cross-contamination, being able to demonstrate good hand washing, and have a change of clothes at the end. I've been in some of these places on some tours, and I knew that I could not go to my following inspection after this. I could probably go do another marijuana facility, but I could not go into any other facility smelling like I smelled. So I think those are things we have to be able to help people with. And, I know that when I did mosquito abatement, yes, I brought other clothes because I could fall into a mud puddle, but I would not think of that when I was doing this kind of inspection. When you're doing manufacturing inspections, you may have to end it at the end of the day, and we may have to think about how we send out people to inspections very differently than we do today. So this would be your one inspection for the day, and after that, we'd have to give you, cut you loose for some free time. And so the devices, the last thing that I looked into was the devices and cleaning of those devices. So when I started thinking about our inspections and inspection reports, our inspection report now is just based on food safety and would need to be reinvented and added onto for those significant health hazards that we found in these facilities. We would have, serving too much, does that go on an inspection report? How do we translate that information onto an inspection report, that does not do a disservice to the facilities? And maybe we do that by permit type. But as I started thinking about what went into an inspection report, it opened up a lot of other questions about how we would actually be, how do you translate this information into a way that can become public record? And so I thought that was, pretty important that we think about those things. So I would like to take the two lists from California for the training and Colorado that helped open up those things. And certainly the document from NEHA to start out as our training. As we learn more about this, the training could probably be narrowed down and we could have some handouts and refreshers. But this became a fairly extensive topic. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. And I'll leave these up just in case you want to see them later.
So Commissioner Dupree.
So you definitely brought up a lot of important things. I know that I think the majority of those are covered in the existing regulations for manufacturing and dispensaries. I think what's really key for discussion is how the inspection process would work for a consumption lounge. And I think at this point, correct me if I'm wrong, it's under CCB's jurisdiction, right? It's the cannabis program existing who already do manufacturing and dispensary inspections. They would also take on these consumption lounge inspections as it's written now. And I think that it would be prudent for us to discuss ways to support them in being able to address the food safety components, being from health departments, and then also some of the specific enforcement that is new in a consumption lounge that hasn't been an issue in just point of sale dispensaries. So for example, how they're enacting their plans and that sort of thing. So I think that would be useful recommendations to send up to CCB.
I don't think, based on my discussions with the CCB earlier, I don't think it's been decided who would inspect what portion. I think the last time we spoke, it was more of a combination approach, much like we do our hospital. We pair a nurse with an environmental health specialist, and they go out and do a joint inspection so that they can feed off each other's specialties. And so this would be, they don't know a lot about the food side, they know a lot about the marijuana side, so that there could be team inspections where teams went out and did inspections, so that we could feed off each other's, knowledge.
A nurse from the hospital? So like the equivalent of a PIC from the restaurant?
No, we have our own nurses. So for HCQC, we hire nurses to go and inspect other nurses. So they're both state employed, both the nurse and the environmental health specialist are from state employee, and they go together, and it's more based a team effort. And they just do the inspection at the same time, so that as I ask questions about, record keeping and employee training, because there's such an overlap, we help each other out with where that information is. So we're not asking the same questions twice.
Yeah, I think that if that's still up for discussion for which jurisdictions will handle which components of inspection and regulation and enforcement. I think that's a discussion that should be had at a bit of a higher level than the Public Health Committee, because we're going to have to get a lot of cooperation between agencies and permitting and fees and responsibilities and that sort of thing. So maybe Chairperson, what do you think is the kind of recommendation they're expecting from us in this regard, do you think?
I feel terribly uneducated in order to answer that question. But I think your overarching question of how should the inspection process work for consumption lounges in order to implement some of the other recommendations we're going to make to for example, the air quality standards, and what are unique problems that we're facing in consumption lounge inspections that we don't have when it comes to, all the stuff that's already existing for manufacturing and for dispensaries, right? There's, as you were mentioning, Commissioner Hayes, like what's the process for allowing emergency personnel into the lounge, for example? What type of PPE do inspectors need in order to inspect a lounge? Should they be entering the lounge during operating hours, or does the lounge need to close in order for them to inspect? Things like that is what I imagine. But one of the things I'm going to do after this meeting is get some clear guidance on exactly how they want these recommendations provided, because we have all different kind of levels of detail, and I don't know to what degree detail is needed or desired. So that's my best guess.
Commissioner Chu?
Yes, I just want to comment that, what everyone else is saying as well, that the CCB inspectors are already well versed in all of the marijuana regulations in here. So talking about the laboratories, those requirements, those are all codified already in the regulations, and they know what to look for. In terms of the disposal, there are parameters of saying, hey, what do you need to do to make things non-usable? And in certain cases, they say, just mixing it with coffee grounds, things like that, mixing it with sand, stuff like that, just so it's not usable in the trash if somebody were to go into it. It's not something dangerous to them, but it's just make it, just not something that somebody is going to want to access that way. So I do agree that I think it probably would be a little more of a team effort, where the CCB inspectors would be looking for, are things being transferred correctly? Are they being tracked, from one place to the other when they receive it, and all of those security requirements. And then the other part of the inspection would be more on the food establishment sort of inspections, saying, are you following those types of things onto there?
Yeah.
And then, good.
Especially with the waste, you could be multiplying waste tenfold. I don't know how much waste goes out of a cannabis facility at this point, but I know that, food facilities generate a significant amount of waste.
Right. So I think that would be a discussion out there as to, how much THC is, leaving the building. Do you have a separate waste stream for that? It just says, hey, this is the stuff you have to deal with. Make sure you're separating it, at that point, so you're not dealing with large quantities of stuff that you're trying to, make unusable. And then it wouldn't really matter if somebody dumpster dove and, got something else out of there.
I will add one comment about the grease interceptors that we talked about earlier. Grease interceptors are usually required at a more local level. I don't know how it's done in Clark County, but for our 13 counties, I cannot necessarily require a grease interceptor. That has to be done at a county level. And so when the county says, no, your prepackaged foods and would not need a grease interceptor, that answer would change with, if the food couldn't leave and they were going to put it, dispose of it somehow, that answer may change. And so we may have to reach out to our county partners, building departments, code enforcements who require those kinds of things in smaller jurisdictions where the health department is not in charge of them.
Okay, looking at the time, so I think I'm going to move on to our plan for our next meeting. So we are still trying to nail down a time for our next meeting, but the goal of the next meeting is for us to decide on what we're going to bring to the Cannabis Advisory Commission as a whole. So that means, I think I'm going to be making those recommendations on our behalf. And so it would be great to make my job a little easier if really we could all have like just here's the recommendation, pretty straightforward, and then I'll probably ask you for justification for those recommendations, and of course you all will be there to answer questions if people have them. But what I want to do at the next meeting again is really get us all to agree on language and what we're going to put up. So, so we all have kind of feedback, things to run down. I think if, after the meeting, if you need additional clarification on what your recommendations will look like, to what detail, there's a little bit of overlap in some people's sections. I think we can nail that down via email. And the next meeting is going to be the last meeting before we make our recommendations. So just keep that in mind. So comments, questions on next steps? Okay.
Oh, sorry. Oh, Commissioner Pearson. So with your comment of email, so are you saying that like we can like communicate with each other, or is that like a violation of the open meeting law?
What I was saying about the email is I will communicate to you the kind of format and level of detail, and if needed, clarification on exactly which topics you should be preparing for your final recommendations. We will not be discussing them amongst ourselves, but clarifying what needs to be brought to the next meeting.
Madam Chair, Ashish here from the AG's office. I could just for 1 minute clarify if members want to send suggestions or feedback back to you, then I would suggest that they send it to Amber or the board coordinator to ensure that we're complying with the open meeting law, because we don't want the back and forth. And if you are sending out a group message, please ensure to just BCC everybody to ensure that there's no reply back. Right. But it should just be this, as you note, just sort of format of how we are communicating and not the substance. And if there's any substantive stuff, then it should go to the board coordinator, Amber.
Yeah. I've been generally erring on the side of just having everything go through Amber. So why not?
Should we also send our slides to Amber as well?
Yes, please send them to Amber and Sarah so that they can post them, so that they can be available to the public. And so I would also now like to, unless there's any other discussion about kind of next steps. Okay, so we're going to move on to public comments, and we might go a couple minutes over, folks. So I apologize. We had so much good conversation. I didn't want to cut us off too much. So the first thing I'm going to do is just address some of the questions in the Q&A, and then as people are kind of thinking through what they might want to say, they can start either raising their hands if they're on a participant on Zoom, or *9 if they're on the phone. So, Ed Alexander asks, I am wondering if the state intends upon putting dram shop protections in place. A dram shop is any business that sells alcoholic beverages, usually a nightlife establishment like a bar or nightclub. Essentially, dram shop liability insurance or liquor liability insurance is protection against costs that you would incur from certain incidents involving your nightlife business. I think that is a great question. I think it's probably outside of the public health committee's question, but I think that's a worthwhile thing to bring up to the Cannabis Advisory Board in general. I guess maybe that would go under public safety, maybe. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, great question. Good idea. And then he also asks, when someone brings in their own personal device and it falls and breaks, injuring someone in close proximity, who is responsible? I'd say that's very much related to your dram shop question. I don't know. And then Mr. Alexander also notes, with the extreme amount of waste currently generated in the industry, like multiple layers of childproof and exit packaging, how is the disposal of single-use devices going to be viewed? I think that would be a probable pushback to single-use limits, definitely, and something we should keep in mind. And I think probably our discussion after, about like perhaps allowing people to bring in their own devices and their own equipment, as long as it's empty and as long as they empty it before they leave, could help with that. An anonymous attendee asks, what is a single serving for inhalants? I don't know that has been established or needs to be established. And, please, if someone else on the commission has something else to add, let me know. But I think the general idea is that people would purchase enough adequate amount for them to use while at the lounge and not have a bunch left over, so they're not, wasting their money and wasting the product. They just need to have enough so that they can consume it on site and then leave. So I don't think we would need to necessarily limit how much someone would purchase. Of course, if they get incredibly intoxicated, then they would be cut off. And then since there's no tracking of individual customer names and metric, okay. The current sales limits are based on possession and not consumption, right? Will the committee be establishing a consumption limit with the thought in mind that no one leaving the lounge will be in possession of any product? I think we established no, that we don't feel that we need to establish a certain number as a limit. The limit will be from the server side, hey, that person seems to be approaching incapacitation. That person, we should not be serving that person anymore. So it's not a formal limit linked to, for example, milligrams, but to whether or not a person can operate. Does that reflect our discussion view, do y'all think? Okay. And let's see, wow, there's so many. Anonymous attendee asks,
Madam Chair,
yes.
I apologize. This is Ashish from the AG's office. Are we in public comment right now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we're just reading the public comments, since the board cannot engage in discussion, and we should.
Sorry.
No worries. Thank you.
I'm treating this like a class, so
Understood.
This is not a review session for a quiz. Okay, so let me just go back to reading the questions and answers, and then we'll go to taking another public comment. Thank you. So anonymous attendee asks, how are establishments allowed to serve food when smoking is occurring in the same place? And then Ed Alexander asks, with various metabolism rates, edible ingestion may require participants to save for 6 to 8 hours. Is this realistic? Anonymous attendee writes, the proper HVAC system will solve the inspection proper. It ends, I think probably inspection problem. The public safety anonymous attendee asks, the Public Safety Commission discussed taking home product not consumed. NUWU had a representative speak on this. I know the board mentioned it wasn't legal, but is that the case? And how should, anonymous attendee asks, how should an establishment determine inebriation? All right. And then I see we have some public comment from, I'm gonna start with Mark Cohen. Open you up, allow you to talk.
Hello, and thank you, Commissioner. I had two comments. One was about the, first of all, I don't know how you can say you're going to set a single-use limit and then say you can't take anything home or you can take something home. As you just read at the last week at one of the public safety meetings, there was a representative, and after the end of going through his entire explanation and the points that he made, pretty much everybody to a man or woman on the committee agreed that it would be a somewhat of an encouragement to overindulge or finish everything you bought before you leave if you cannot take what you haven't finished consuming with you. And with regard to the air quality, again, a comment that I heard you read, it would be the HVAC system. And right now, if you just would use the most strenuous Cal OSHA requirements, say the same for a toxic environment and or a cigar lounge, then you have the beginnings already of solving your air quality and problem of the inspections. So pretty much that's what I have to say on those. And the other thing is there are a lot of dispensary people who are going to do consumption lounges. But in addition to that, there will be independent lounges, which are only about bringing your own in and consuming on premises and then leaving. Some will have food, some won't. But those are also items that we have to begin to take into consideration as we form these rules. And that's pretty much what I had to say.
Hey, thank you. I next see Ed Alexander. I'm going to allow you to talk.
Thank you for taking the time. A couple of points. You know, Mark had just mentioned that we're going to have independent facilities. So now it sounds to me like we're going to issue licenses where non-dispensary related consumption lounges will have the ability to transact retail sales, which feels like we're essentially opening up a whole new stream of dispensaries in an already crowded space. My primary concerns, though, revolve around the fact that there is significant liability on behalf of the establishments and the state as it relates to dram shop. I'm very concerned that we're limiting the ability for consumers to come into it. You know, I have a dispensary that was built with the purpose of at some point having a co-located consumption facility on site. And so when we say that people can't leave with product, theoretically, just for the sake of argument, we'll say that a 1 gram is a consumable limit. So I could sell them 27 grams of material that was intended for consumption after they left the facility, and a single use item that was intended for consumption while in said lounge. I just hope we're not painting a path where the only time somebody comes to visit a lounge, which may be co-located with a dispensary, they're only allowed to make a purchase of that single use item. I appreciate the extensive amount of time that's been spent on the safety of the products, but I'd also like to remind the committee that every item that would be available for consumption would have already been required to have third-party lab certification associated with it. So layering on additional layers of cost associated with subsequent testing seems odd when, you know, Benjamin's lab has certified that the flour is free of pesticides, molds, and other contaminants. All we're doing is changing the package that it's essentially being dispensed in. So I would just ask that we don't unduly burden an industry that's already hyper scrutinized. So I appreciate the effort that you guys are putting in, and I hope that we take time to consider some commonsensical approaches to moving this topic along.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment on the phone?
I see no other public comment. Oh, someone else just raised their hand.
Okay, I am going to allow Nate. Yes, Nate, go ahead.
Yes, hello. I did want to say one thing. I've been listening to the other subcommittees too, and I'm noticing that we're drawing a lot of the pre-established regulations from other states such as Colorado and California, and not taking into account that Nevada is trying to create our consumption lounges where smoking flower is readily accessible because of the problem we're having with people purchasing it and not having no place to actually consume it once they go into the casinos or anywhere else. Whereas Colorado explicitly did not want smoking in their establishments, or California's restrictions are limited to more of a paid membership. I just think that we need to also be encouraged to think outside of the box and marry our two industries with the nightclubs, the comedy lounges, the social events that we have that thrive in our community that have so many tourist implications, where they're being able to take all of that in considerations as well. But as everyone said, you guys are doing a great job. And hopefully we just, also try to make our industry more tailored to our strong suits. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment, either on the phone or on the web? No more public comments?
I see no other public comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, only 7 minutes over. Well done, everyone. Okay, so we've got our input. We've got an idea of where we need to go, and we're in the process of scheduling that next meeting. So we will talk probably in another 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone, for your time and engagement.